Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm going to be doing another book review for you, and that is for Reaper Man by Terry Pratchett. So Reaper Man is one of the books in the very long Discworld series, which includes, I think, 40 or more books. But this is the second part of the Death sub-series, which has 5 books. I read the first book, Mort, earlier this year and really enjoyed it. And I picked up Reaper Man, and I figured I would check it out because I really enjoyed Mort. I also have read Small Gods, which was the first Discworld book that I read and really enjoyed that as well. So I've been really enjoying Discworld from what I have read, so I grabbed Reaper Man, figured I would check it out, continued the Death series since I've already started it, so I figured I would read that one before any of the other ones. And I really enjoyed this one. It was a really good book. It basically, you know, everything that I loved about the first 2 Discworld books that I read was present here, and this may actually be a new favorite of the series for me. So to start out with the premise for this book, which I would consider to be a really strong and fun premise, it seems to me, based on these first 2 books, I don't know if the rest of the series is like that for the Death series, but it seems to me that Death isn't necessarily always the main character. He's a main character, but he's not the central singular character in these books. But something happens involving him that just causes some sort of interesting predicament or whatever. So in Mort, it was that Death was recruiting an assistant, and then his assistant ended up having some stuff go on that led to some very entertaining situations. This one, Death is sent off to live a normal life, basically on a farm, helping an elderly lady, I believe. And he, so that happens, and because Death, as the character who takes you from life into, you know, the afterlife or whatever, you know, since he's no longer doing his job, when people die, they don't get taken to the afterlife. Instead, they may just die and then come back, which is what happens to, I would say, the other central character in this book named Wendell Poons, who is a wizard, who dies and then becomes essentially undead because he wasn't brought over to the afterlife. So it's a very entertaining premise. It's one that I really enjoyed. That's one of my favorite things about Discworld so far, I guess, to start out with actual positives. One of my favorite things about Discworld so far is the premises of these 3 books that I have read, because it just takes, you know, this concept of death for these first 2 Death books, and says, okay, you have this personification of Death, who, you know, as I said, brings you from, you know, the real world to the afterlife or whatever, and exploring different situations that might arise if things related to that go not the way they're normally supposed to. And just the creativity of these premises, I guess, was a lot of fun, even with Small Gods as well. But especially for Reaper Man, the idea of Death not being around, so then seeing how that influences things, it's a lot of fun. And then also being able to see Death as his own person living a normal life, because in Mort he had some characterization but not a whole lot. In this book you really get more of Death and his personality and him reflecting on things and all that kind of stuff. Of course, with this being a Terry Pratchett book, with this being a Discworld book, I cannot not mention the fact that this book is really funny. The 3 Discworld books I've read so far have been absolutely hilarious, this one obviously included. I don't know if it's my favorite comedy out of the 3. It very well could be. There was some really fun comedy in here with Death and Mrs. Flitworth, I can't remember exactly the name, the elderly lady that he works on the farm with. He works with her, and there's some funny dynamics there with her, you know, not realizing at first that he's Death, but then him, you know, being used to doing the whole Death thing, then having to actually do regular person stuff leads to some funny jokes and things like that. With Wendell Poons, again the wizard who is undead, there's a lot of funny stuff that happens with him. He's a part of this group of wizards, and the wizards are trying to figure out what the heck happened to him. Why is he not dead? That obviously leads to some very funny moments. There's a group of people that Windlepoons meets up with who are also like undead or things like that. So you have like vampires and werewolf-like characters who are not actually werewolves, but they're similar. I'm not going to say anything more than that because I thought the revelation of that was really funny. Different things like that. Characters who are, you know, undead or something similar to that, and they have a lot of funny moments, like the vampires who are trying to speak like vampires but occasionally speak in a normal way. That was kind of funny. There's just a lot of good comedy in this book, as you would expect from Terry Pratchett. It's kind of the selling point with these books. But there's also, you know, a whole lot of deeper, more interesting themes. There's a lot of heart in this book, and his books in general. This one, to me, even though in a lot of ways I liked it on a relatively similar level to the other two Discworld books I've read, this one's probably my favorite. And I would say the reason for that is because it just had a lot of heart to it, and it resonated with me, I would say, on a more emotional level. I'm not really sure exactly how to explain it more so than that, but there are certain themes that are tackled in this book about, you know, mortality, or about, you know, just living a normal life, or different things like that, that I don't know what it was about it, but it just kind of struck a chord with me and really resonated with me, and made me a little emotional at times, I'm not gonna lie. Whereas the other two Discworld books that I've read, which I really loved the themes and things in those books, and kind of the deeper meanings that they may have been conveying, but they didn't really strike me on that same emotional level, whereas this one really did. And so that's probably why this one is my favorite of the bunch. Kind of branching off of that with the emotional side of things, I really loved what this book did with Death as a character. As I said, he was, you know, he had a personality in the first book, but not like, he wasn't hugely developed. Whereas in this one, because he's living a normal life and interacting with regular people and all this stuff, he really develops this personality. He develops, you know, feelings basically. And, you know, he looks at what life is and the way he feels about that and all of that stuff, and I really enjoyed that about it. I'm curious to see how that is further explored in the later books. And as far as negatives for this book, there really isn't much. I enjoyed this book throughout. The other two Discworld books that I've read, I hate to be comparing this one so much to the other two, but I kind of think about them all together because they are all one series, so I apologize if you maybe didn't want that, but that's kind of just how I think of them. The other two Discworld books I've read, you know, I enjoyed a whole lot up until kind of the end part where the plot kind of lost me with those books. That didn't happen with this one. There were points kind of in the middle where I wasn't as engaged in the plot, particularly the Windlepoons side of the plot. At times wasn't as interesting to me, but usually that would only last for a very brief, you know, few pages, and then, you know, it would go back over to Death, or something, you know, funny would happen or whatever. And I would be right back into it. So even though this book didn't completely have me engaged all the way throughout, it had me engaged throughout the vast majority, and the parts where I wasn't as into it, it was still enjoyable. You know, I would still see the funny jokes and laugh at them, or, you know, think there was some clever bits of writing or things like that. But, you know, sometimes it just wasn't as interesting, but I did really enjoy the Death side of the story all the way through, and I enjoyed most of the Windlepoon side of the story. And that's pretty much the only negative point that I have for this book. Overall, I really, really did love this. It was one of my favorite books I've read this year, and as I said, it's probably my favorite of the 3 Discworld books that I've read so far. I really enjoyed it a lot. You know, it had everything that I loved in the first 2 books and more. You know, it had the comedy, it had the fun world building, which is not something I really have talked about much in regards to these books, but the world building in these books, I feel like isn't hugely focused on, but it's good, and it's kind of funny sometimes and things like that. Great character stuff, especially again with Death and Mrs. Flitworth. And Windlepoons as well has some cool character stuff, and the other characters, but especially Death, who I just loved in this book. You know, interesting premise, interesting plot, really clever premise, you know, taking that idea and running with it. You know, the whole what if Death wasn't around. That whole idea, really good stuff. And then on top of all of that, you know, doing all of these things that I think the other two books that I've read did really well, also having that more emotional element, having that little something, I guess, that just really pulls me in on a deeper level than just reading the book and enjoying the plot and characters and comedy, like actually emotionally investing me in it in some way. I really appreciated that about it. So I really enjoyed this book a lot. As far as a rating out of 10 that I would give Reaper Man, I would give it a 9.5 out of 10. Pretty higher score, I think, than the other two books, which in most cases I did enjoy this on a similar level, but I think just because of the pure fun and enjoyment and emotional attachment, I guess, that I had to the stuff going on in this book, I just think it deserves a very high score. And it was just a joy to read, as Discworld typically has been so far. I'm really loving this series a lot. You know, as I read more of it, granted, I've only read 3 books out of 40 something, but as I read more of it, I'm sure this will definitely become one of my favorite series that I've read, because even right now, it's already pretty high up there, even though I wouldn't consider a favorite because I've only read such a small portion of it. But just based on the pure enjoyment that I've got out of this series, I would consider it already among my favorites. So let me know down in the comments if you have read Reaper Man or any of the other Discworld books, specifically the Death books. I'm curious what you think of those, and this book in particular, or more of Discworld. Again, really loving this series a whole lot. I'm really excited to continue reading this series. I'm hoping to get some more of the Death books later this year, because I'd like to kind of you know, read them every couple months or so. I want to read Hogfather, the 4th book, around Christmas time if I'm able to, because that's, from the looks of it, is a Christmassy book. So I'm hoping I'm able to do that. Maybe I won't be able to, depending on if I can find those books. But that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm really enjoying this series a lot. And as I said, Discworld definitely has the potential to become an all-time favorite for me. So that is pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.